In just 37 seconds, Clarence Thomas threw a verbal punch on live TV, mocking Jasmine Crockett with 5 words that sliced like glass. "You study law on TikTok," cameras froze. The room went silent, but Jasmine didn't blink. She reached for a folder that burned. What did she pull out? That turned a Supreme Court justice into a national scandal before the second hand hit 38. The red tally light blinked once, then locked into a cold, unblinking stare. C-SPAN was live. No edits. No room for second takes. Just one camera. And millions of Americans watching. Inside room 316, the temperature didn't change, but the air tightened like it knew something dangerous had just entered. Polished wood, brass nameplates, and 40 years of precedent lined the walls like silent jurors. The microphones were already hot. The trap was already set. Jasmine Crockett stepped into the chamber with the calm of a woman who knew exactly how history turns. Her heels struck the marble floor not with elegance, but with intention. In her right hand was a plain-worn folder. Inside, documents never meant to see daylight. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked at the seats, the men, the judges, and then she looked at Clarence Thomas. He didn't stand, didn't nod, just leaned back slowly, arms crossed, lips curled in something between a smirk and a yawn. His eyes moved over her like she was part of the carpet. A noise, not a voice. The two locked eyes for just one breath. She didn't flinch. Neither did he. A committee staffer called the hearing to order. Somewhere in the back, a phone vibrated. The gavel dropped. And just like that, the match was lit. How do you confront a man who's worn silence as armor for 3 decades and still draw blood with words? Jasmine's voice was calm, deliberate. She cited Caperton versus A.T. Massey Cole Cohen, then U.S. versus Mississippi cases where judicial ethics weren't just compromised, they were bought. Her finger tapped once against a printed itinerary, one of 9 unreported luxury trips gifted to Clarence Thomas by billionaire donors. The committee leaned in. She wasn't just naming dates. She was building a case, one that didn't target a man, but the silence that made men untouchable. Clarence Thomas didn't blink, but something in his posture shifted barely. He leaned forward slowly, arms still folded, voice low but razor sharp. "You study law on TikTok?" The words landed like a slap in a room full of microphones. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was cruel, controlled. A few snickers from the Republican side, one smirk from the far end of the bench. Jasmine didn't laugh. She didn't move. She just stared at him, eyes steady, lips sealed, like the insult hadn't pierced but crystallized into something heavier. Around her, the silence wasn't awkward. It was surgical. One staffer choked back a cough. Another scribbled a note they'd never dare read aloud. The red tally light on the camera stayed on. Clarence leaned back again, lips curled satisfied. Jasmine's fingers moved not out of habit but precision toward a device that didn't just hold receipts. It held detonations. She tapped once. The screen blinked, then loaded. What do you do when a Supreme Court justice throws the first punch with 5 words sharpened like a knife? Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a single word. She just stared long enough for the silence to become unbearable. Long enough for the weight of his insult to flip and start pressing down on him. That was the first time his smirk twitched. Somewhere across the country, a tweet went viral. Then a second. Then 1,000. "You study law" exploded across timelines like a siren in a courthouse. Screens lit up from Harlem to Houston. TikTok lawyers, law students, survivors of every courtroom injustice. They weren't laughing, they were loading up receipts. Inside the chamber, Jasmine tapped once on her tablet. No words, no flair, just purpose. The display flickered to life. A time-stamped video. Unpublished, untraceable, and very, very real. Clarence leaned forward again this time, not to mock, but to see. She didn't look at him. She didn't have to. The damage was already leaking into the walls. One camera zoomed in on her face. Another caught the tightening grip in Clarence's hands. Behind her, a Democratic aide mouthed something under their breath. 3 seats down, a clerk's pen slipped and clattered to the floor. No one moved to pick it up. Then Jasmine breathed in, slow, controlled, like a surgeon before the first incision. What footage did she just load? That made a Supreme Court justice forget how to breathe. Jasmine didn't ask for permission. She didn't preface or explain. She just tapped play. The chamber's main screen blinked once, then filled with grainy video timestamped 2 years prior. A mahogany dining room. Dim lighting. Laughter clinking off crystal glasses. Clarence Thomas at the head of the table sleeves rolled up bourbon in hand. They're all lawyers now, he chuckled. Posting courtroom cosplay on TikTok pretending they understand jurisprudence. Another sip. Another laugh. Then the line that dropped the room into ice. What the Constitution needs is fewer feelings and fewer followers. The sound wasn't distorted. The angle wasn't unclear. His face was lit, his voice unmistakable. One of the committee members, Senator Harwood, leaned forward so fast his glasses slid down his nose. No one dared move. Thomas's eyes narrowed. He didn't look at Jasmine. He looked at the camera, the screen, the past catching up like a hammer. Jasmine stood perfectly still. Her arms relaxed, but her posture lethal. She hadn't raised her tone. She didn't need to. The truth was already screaming. Across the chamber, someone whispered, "Is this real?" Another whispered back, "That's his voice." The audio ended. The screen went black. No applause, no reaction, just breathless silence. And Jasmine broke it with a single sentence. "Now, would you like to repeat your question about TikTok?" What happens when the most powerful judge in America puts his ego on record and someone finally presses play? The silence after the recording wasn't just awkward, it was raw. Clarence Thomas sat stone-faced, but the veneer was cracking. Cameras panned. Committee members shifted. The balance of power had moved an inch. Jasmine stepped into that space and filled it. She looked up not at him, but at the room. "I didn't study law on TikTok. I studied it under fluorescent lights at 2 a.m. while waiting tables at a diner off I-35. I studied it while holding eviction notices in one hand and textbooks in the other." No one interrupted. No one dared. "I didn't go viral. I went broke. I didn't trend, I survived. That's where I learned the law." She slid a document across the desk, Taylor versus DPS, a civil rights case she'd argued and won, forcing the state to compensate a black veteran wrongfully imprisoned for 19 years. Then another Hernandez versus County Board, where she fought for an undocumented teen denied life-saving surgery. Every name was a scar that proved she'd earned her armor. The cameras caught it all. Thomas shifted in his seat, but Jasmine never looked at him. The room didn't see a freshman anymore. They saw a fighter, a survivor, a reckoning in motion. "So no, I don't cosplay courtrooms. I've buried clients. I've faced real judges. And I'm not here to perform. But could the system survive someone who didn't come to play by its rules?" Outside the chamber, the world caught fire. Within minutes, clips of Jasmine's speech were everywhere. CNN played it on loop. MSNBC called it a turning point. TikTok lawyers stitched her line, "I studied," while holding eviction notices like it was scripture. Even conservative scholars couldn't deny it. She had outmaneuvered a Supreme Court justice in real time. At the Capitol gates, the protest grew louder. Some carried signs that read, "She spoke for me." Others wore robes spray-painted with unearned power. The nation wasn't watching a hearing anymore. It was watching a reckoning. Inside, Clarence Thomas stirred. He'd stayed silent for most of her testimony, but something in his posture tightened. His jaw clenched. Then he spoke, cutting across her mid-sentence like a blade. "You've made your point, Congresswoman." She didn't raise her voice, just her hand. "I don't need your permission to speak. I have the Constitution for that." The line didn't land like applause. It landed like thunder. Reporters outside turned toward the building like someone had fired a shot. Thomas said nothing else. Jasmine adjusted her mic. Her hand was steady. The room had changed. But outside these walls, where power still cloaked itself in tradition and silence, was the truth enough to hold its ground. Jasmine didn't rush. She let the quiet settle like dust before a detonation. Then she reached into her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. No dramatic gestures, just the weight of what was written on it. It was a list. 9 cases, each one stamped with Clarence Thomas's vote against civil rights protections. She read them aloud. No commentary, Just names and case numbers like carving them into stone. Jackson versus Texas Corrections, Reed versus State Medical Board, Walker versus Federal Housing Authority. Then she paused. Vasquez versus United States Health Administration. That name hung in the air like a bell toll. Jasmine looked at the panel, voice steady. He was a decorated Marine. Stage 3 cancer, denied federal health care because of a technicality Justice Thomas dismissed as procedural noise. He died 7 months later. I know this because I stood beside his wife at the funeral. No one moved. The only sound was the distant buzz of a fluorescent light. Jasmine placed the list on the table in front of her. Black ink, white paper. But everyone felt the blood behind every name. Thomas didn't speak. His eyes never left the page, but his jaw tightened. Barely. Just enough. These weren't footnotes, she said. These were lives. And you ruled them out of existence. The camera lingered on her face. But how do you bury the truth once it's been read out loud? The list was still on the table when Jasmine reached for a second document. This one wasn't a legal brief or a court file. It was a photograph, faded, folded at the corners. She held it up without a word. Anita Hill. Her face stared back at the chamber from a time most of them wanted to forget. Clarence Thomas shifted in his seat. Barely, but enough. Jasmine placed the photo down, then slid forward a printed scan. A note, handwritten, initialed. It had been leaked 3 weeks ago by a former aide who couldn't stay quiet anymore. 5 words scribbled in blue ink. We buried that chapter. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room had gone still. No side whispers. No coughs. Just the sound of collective memory waking up. She looked at Thomas. Not with fire, but with something colder. Something that cuts deeper than anger, disappointment. Buried, she said quietly. That's what you called it. But she was never dead. You just stopped listening. A female staffer near the back blinked hard, pressing her lips tight. One of the junior senators looked down at his notes like they were written in shame. This wasn't about judicial theory anymore. This was about a legacy written in erasure, and a woman who refused to stay erased. What happens when the ghosts you buried come back holding evidence? The chamber still buzzed from Eli Masters' testimony, but Jasmine didn't pause. She returned to her seat with the calm of someone who had learned to walk through fire without leaving ashes. Eyes followed her, not with doubt this time, but with a mix of wariness and awe. The shift in power wasn't subtle anymore. It was visible inch by inch, reshaping the room. Then from the far right bench came a voice that didn't bother to hide behind civility. A justice, older and smirking, leaned just close enough to be heard. Affirmative action in a suit, he muttered like the words were a private joke passed between kings. The insult wasn't shouted, but it landed like a backhand across glass. Measured, dismissive, cruel. Jasmine heard it. Everyone did. The temperature in the room dropped by 10 degrees, but she didn't so much as blink. She reached for her tablet with the same calm precision she had used all morning and tapped the screen. The chamber's monitor lit up not with evidence, not with leaks, but with something deeper. A graduation stage. A roaring crowd. Jasmine stepping to the podium as valedictorian magna cum laude, delivering a speech on constitutional law that made professors weep. It was dated grainy, but her voice cut through the chamber like steel. She said nothing now. She didn't need to. Her past had just spoken louder than any whisper. The screen faded to black, and suddenly the only thing outdated in that room was the man who thought she hadn't earned it. The screen dimmed, but the silence stayed sharp. Jasmine didn't move. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, her eyes fixed ahead, unreadable. But everyone in the chamber felt the shift. She wasn't defending herself anymore. The burden of proof had flipped. The question was no longer whether she belonged, but whether they did. Then came the voice. It echoed from the overhead speakers, crisp and unmistakable. Dr. Eleanor Brooks, former Dean of the University of Houston Law Center, appeared via live feed. Her expression was firm, her tone surgical. She earned every inch of that stage, Dr. Brooks said. No shortcut, no handout. Jasmine Crockett was the first student I ever saw draft a constitutional argument that left 3 professors speechless. The room froze. No one looked at Thomas, but they all felt his presence shrinking. Jasmine didn't react. She didn't need to. Her silence was no longer defensive. It was loaded, calculated, dangerous. Like a drawn bow held steady, waiting for the tremble of the target. Every second she stayed quiet said more than 100 shouted rebuttals. The live feed cut out. No one dared speak first. The insult had backfired publicly permanently, and the man who whispered it now looked small in a way no robe could cover. Because once you strip away the lies, what's left standing tells the truth on its own. The feed cut to black, but the echo of the dean's voice still lingered. No one looked at the justice who whispered. They didn't have to. His words had already rotted in the air. Jasmine sat in silence, spine straight, unmoved. Then she leaned into the mic slowly, deliberately. Her voice was calm, but it carried like thunder. Some inherit power, some earn it. I know which path leaves footprints. The line hit like a verdict. Not a shout, not a slam. Just a blade slid quietly across the table. For a split second, the chamber froze. Then the applause began, tentative at first, then building, then unavoidable. Not polite, not performative. Earned. Clarence Thomas didn't clap. He didn't blink. But his jaw tightened just enough for the cameras to catch it. The smirk from earlier was gone. What replaced it wasn't rage. It was something worse. Fear. Jasmine didn't acknowledge the clapping. She didn't bask in it. She simply folded her hands and waited for it to fade. Power, she knew, wasn't in the noise. It was in the stillness afterward, when the truth stayed behind and the liars couldn't outrun it. But applause fades. Headlines shift. And legacy, once cracked, rarely repairs itself. So the question hung in the silence like smoke. When the nation finally sees the truth, will it be brave enough to remember it? The applause faded, but the weight in the room only grew heavier. Jasmine waited until every eye returned to her, then reached into her blazer pocket. Not for papers, not for a microphone, for something smaller, more dangerous. A simple flash drive. She placed it on the desk like it carried more weight than any gavel in the room. Clarence Thomas did not move, but the way his gaze locked on it said enough. Jasmine let the silence do the work, then leaned forward, her voice low, but cutting through the air like glass. This contains flight logs, wire transfers, photos, private dinner rosters, all linked to the same name, Harlan Crow. A ripple moved through the chamber. Jasmine slid the drive across the table, slow and deliberate. A clerk picked it up with both hands, like handling evidence at a crime scene. The main screen behind her lit up. A list of files appeared clear and cold. Justice 01, Cayman 2 Crown Dinner Log, Yacht Footage 3. There were no headlines, no opinions, just names, places, patterns. No one spoke. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. A reporter's pen stopped mid-sentence. One of the senior aides stared at the screen like watching a train come off the tracks. Jasmine said nothing else. She didn't need to. The data had already detonated. And when justice travels by private jet, sleeps on borrowed yachts, and hides behind closed doors, what part of it still belongs to the people? The screen still glowed with file names when the chamber doors opened again. The hush fell instantly. No announcement. Just footsteps, soft, hesitant, real. A young woman entered, mid-30s, straight back but visibly trembling. She clutched a folder to her chest like it was armor. Jasmine stood to greet her, not with ceremony but with quiet understanding. This, she said to the room, is Samantha Crowell, daughter of James Crowell, former chief ethics officer at the Office of Government Oversight. A few heads turned. The name landed hard. Samantha sat down, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly into the camera. My father kept records. Every flight, every favor, every envelope left off official filings. He submitted warnings to internal DOJ channels. He asked for investigations, and he was told to let it go. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. They said it would destroy the reputation of the bench, that no one would listen. So he backed down, but he made copies, and he gave them to me. She opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, time-stamped reports, handwritten notes, every page screaming the same truth. Across the chamber, Clarence Thomas sat still, but something in his eyes darkened. A storm without thunder, a legacy folding in on itself. Jasmine did not move. The room did not breathe. Because when the system tells good men to stay silent, sometimes it is their daughters who speak the loudest. Samantha's hands trembled as she passed the final envelope to Jasmine. Aged paper, folded carefully, corners worn. Jasmine took it without a word and opened it slowly, as if unsealing something sacred. The room went still again. This letter, she said, was written by James Crowell, addressed to Attorney General Merrick Garland. It was never sent. She began to read. I write to you not out of bitterness, but duty. I have witnessed behavior that threatens the integrity of the highest court in our country. Lavish gifts, hidden deals, justice for sale beneath the robe. Her voice never wavered. The chamber listened, every line cutting deeper. I understand that opening this door may shake public trust, but shielding the truth does not preserve justice. It poisons it. Jasmine looked up, then read the final line. If the robe protects the corrupt, then who protects the people? She folded the letter and placed it beside the USB drive, beside the list of rulings, beside the photo of Anita Hill. A quiet altar of truth built from pieces no one had wanted to see. Clarence Thomas did not speak. He did not blink. Across the chamber, no one moved, because the weight of that question, once written in secret, now echoed across a nation watching live. And in a room built to shield power, who dares to answer that question? Today, the chamber was still echoing with the weight of the letter when Jasmine reached for the microphone one more time. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't rise. It was the calm of someone who had walked the fire and come out colder. She looked at the committee, then at the cameras, and spoke with the precision of a closing argument. Given the pattern of behavior presented here today, I move that Justice Clarence Thomas be formally recused from all pending and future civil rights cases before the Supreme Court. The words didn't explode. They carved. A wave of stunned silence swept across the panel. Papers rustled. Eyebrows lifted. Clarence Thomas let out a sharp exhale and leaned forward. Absurd, he said. Politically motivated. Baseless. But no one nodded. No one defended him. Then came the voice no one expected. Senator Nolan, a centrist Republican, known more for silence than spine, cleared his throat and spoke. I second the motion. Gasps rippled through the room. Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to. The shift had already happened. Across the chamber, Thomas leaned back again, but now it looked less like confidence and more like retreat. Power does not vanish in an instant, but sometimes it starts with a sentence and ends with no one left to echo it. The motion for recusal hadn't just shaken the chamber, it cracked open the country. Within hours, networks split down the middle. Fox News ran a chyron calling Jasmine a radical opportunist with a personal vendetta. MSNBC played her full testimony on repeat, dubbing her the conscience of the chamber. Social media fractured like glass under pressure. One side called for her resignation. The other called for Clarence Thomas's. Outside the Capitol, the crowd swelled. Protesters stood shoulder to shoulder, many wearing black robes with the word complicit painted across the back in white brushstroke. Some carried broken gavels. Others held photos of the Vasquez family, Anita Hill, James Crowell. It was no longer a legal hearing. It was a national reckoning. Inside her office, Jasmine sat alone for the first time all day. The noise outside was faint but constant. Then her phone rang. It was her mother. Her voice cracked through the receiver like a warm wind breaking into a frozen room. You have already won, baby. Now finish it. Jasmine didn't cry. She just nodded even though no one could see her. She closed her eyes, letting the moment settle like dust before the next storm. Outside, someone banged on a drum. Inside, the silence returned. Because when the truth leaves the building, the question isn't who heard it, but who has the courage to stand behind it. The air inside the chamber was thick with tension, the kind that doesn't scream but waits to explode. Then came the soft shuffle of shoes across marble. A new voice asked to be heard. He was young, early 30s. Clean-cut, sharp suit, a small pin on his lapel. A former clerk, not for Jasmine, but for one of the most conservative justices on the bench. His name was Matthew Lang. He cleared his throat. The room braced. I came here today with doubts, he said, but I sat through every minute, every document, every name. He looked toward Jasmine. She is not angry. She is accurate. No one moved. Even the lights seemed to pause. Jasmine held her breath, then finally let it out, slow, careful, earned. It was not vindication. It was confirmation. One voice from the other side willing to break ranks for truth. Lang stepped away. No speech. No grand exit. Just a ripple left behind. Thomas shifted in his chair for the first time in minutes. But it was not the movement of authority, it was a man realizing the room might no longer belong to him. And when power feels the walls closing in, it rarely surrenders quietly. So the question now was not whether Jasmine had won, but what the old guard might do to stop her before she finishes. The final gavel had not yet fallen, but everyone in the chamber knew something irreversible had just taken place. Not a ruling, but a reckoning. The room was heavy with silence, not the silence of hesitation, but of aftermath. Jasmine stood slowly. She did not shuffle papers or adjust the mic. She already knew what she came to say. She didn't raise her voice, didn't turn toward her critics or her supporters. Her gaze went straight into the lens of the broadcast camera, piercing through glass wires and distance. She wasn't speaking to the people in that room anymore. She was speaking to the nation. Justice is not a robe, it is responsibility. The sentence dropped like a stone into still water. No reaction, no rebuttal. Just a stillness that deepened with every breathless second. Clarence Thomas sat frozen, his chin lowered, his eyes fixed on nothing. He didn't interrupt, didn't smirk. The weight in the air had shifted, and even he could feel it. Jasmine stepped back from the mic without waiting for applause. She didn't need it. Her words weren't meant to echo. They were meant to stay, in the files, in the chamber, in the memory of every American who had ever asked if power could be held accountable. And in that room where silence once protected the untouchable, something had finally cracked. Because sometimes justice doesn't shout. It just refuses to look away. The vote passed with little resistance. No dramatic speeches, no fiery objections. Just a series of quiet affirmatives that sealed what the chamber already knew. Clarence Thomas, for the first time in his career, formally recused himself from all pending civil rights cases. No explanation, no apology, just ink and silence. But the true verdict didn't arrive in legal language or procedural motions. It happened outside where barricades met a sea of people. Elders wept in front of courthouse steps, holding photos of those who never lived to see this day. College students refreshed law school applications with Jasmine's name in the search bar. And across every platform in every comment section, 5 words echoed like a national heartbeat. She spoke for me. It wasn't just a win, it was a shift, a fracture in the illusion that justice was only ever about robes and rituals. Jasmine had opened a door that generations were told did not exist. Inside the chamber, the lights dimmed. Outside, the country lit up. And for one moment, not loud, not orchestrated, but honest people across every corner of the nation breathed a little deeper because they knew someone had finally said what they could not. And the silence had finally answered back. Jasmine didn't linger. She didn't wave, didn't pause for the cameras. She gathered her folder creased at the corners, fingerprints along the spine, and walked out of the chamber the same way she entered. Silent, steady, unshaken. Her footsteps echoed against the marble floor, each one sharp and final, like a gavel that refused to lie. Those still seated turned to watch her go, but no one dared speak. Not now. Not after everything that had just been unburied in plain sight. Outside, the protests had quieted, but the energy hadn't left. People lined the barricades. Some held signs. Some held hands. Some simply stood in silence, watching her descend the steps with the same poise she held at the podium. She never looked back. Later that night, as news anchors traded sound bites and headlines fought for oxygen, one clip replayed again and again. It wasn't her testimony. It wasn't the evidence. It was the walk, the silence, the stillness of a woman who never raised her voice, and yet had shaken the walls of power. Over the screen, a final line appeared. Sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the one that refused to sit down. And then came the question, quiet but heavy. Would you have stood beside her or stayed seated? Sometimes you don't need to raise your voice to make change. You just need the courage to stand when silence is expected. When one woman walks straight through a system built to ignore her, she doesn't just make the nation listen, She makes the silent re-examine themselves. In a world that often tells us to stay quiet, to stay safe, would you still hold your voice steady? If this story made you pause, don't just scroll past it. Like, share and subscribe to Hill Insights, where voices like Jasmine's don't echo alone, they spark change. Tap the bell, because the next story might not just reveal injustice, it might reveal your place in it. What moment shook you the most? Tell us in the comments, because silence is easy, but truth needs company. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. Truth isn't over, it's just waiting for someone to hear it.